Arman Abrahimzadeh was South Australia's Young Australian of the Year in 2016 and is a recipient of the Order of Australia Medal. He's been recognised for his great contribution to domestic violence prevention, a passion of his that was born out of his family's horrific story.
12 months after we fled the family home, my dad tracked my mum down at the convention centre, and this was on the 21st of March 2010. And he stabbed her to death in front of 300 witnesses.
It followed decades of abuse of Arman, his sisters and his mother Zahra. Arman's father was jailed for 26 years, leaving him to look after his little sister and try to piece his life together after extreme trauma.
We became parents overnight. We were legal guardians of my younger sister. She was 12 years old at the time that my mum passed away, and my dad went to jail.
He and his sisters established the Zahra Foundation in honour of his mother to empower women escaping domestic violence. In Australia, one woman is killed every week by her current or ex-partner, and 1 in 3 Australian women have experienced some form of abuse from their significant other. Arman is the man to tell us what we can do to change that. Welcome to Young Blood, a podcast all about young men's health. My name's Callum McPherson, I'm a journalist, and this is our mission to talk about the stuff that matters and isn't talked about enough. Let's do it. Tell me about your mum.
My mum was a typical mum. She would fuss over you. She would nag you. She would stress you, and I guess she was a typical mum. She was someone who cared for you. She was someone who was compassionate, and I guess I really looked up to her as a role model. As a young boy, as we do, young men, we look up to our dads, or our older brothers, or uncles, grandfathers, whatever it might be. But for me, I looked up to my dad as a role model for a long time. And when I started to sort of realize that he wasn't really a role model for me to follow, I started looking at my mum. And so in my late teenage years and in my early 20s, I learned a lot from my mum.
What was it like for you growing up at home?
Growing up at home, it was difficult, but at the same time, it was a normal thing for us to witness abuse, to witness violence, to be abused, and for my father, who was the head of the household, for him to run the house. If he didn't agree with something, it wouldn't go ahead. It was either his way or the highway. I've got an older sister who's about 18 months older than me, and I've got a younger sister who's about 10 years younger than me. And so for all of us three, we were always told to talk in a certain way, respect my dad, but now that I look at it, it wasn't really about respect, it was about fear for him. So for me and my sisters, it was a little bit hard, to sort of go to school, you look at your friends and see how everyone else does things in their family home, and then for us to come back to our family home and see the way things were run in our family home. So for us, it was a bit difficult, but I guess we had each other and we supported one another, and we managed to get out of that abusive family home. We managed to leave it all behind and go somewhere where we were all safe.
What form did that abuse take?
The abuse came in all forms and shapes. It was emotional abuse, psychological. There was financial abuse. There was physical abuse. Lots of physical abuse. My parents would argue maybe 2, 3, 4 times a week. It was a normal thing for my parents to argue, and so we in my teenage years, I sort of had I developed a bit of a routine where if my parents argued, I would step in the middle of them to try and act as a physical barrier to try and stop my dad from assaulting my mum. Sometimes I copped some, a few punches, slaps, and kicks, but that was a normal thing in our family home. As far as I remember, yeah. My earliest childhood memories are of him, losing his shit, and in the process, my sisters and I and my mum would cop it. That was normal. That was a normal thing for us, yeah. 2, 3, 4 times a week, an argument would break out, and it was a normal thing.
Were you always afraid, or did you get to the point where you're like, well, that's just how it's meant to be?
I would say up to my teenage years, it became a routine for us. But maybe when I was 15 or 16, when I started to act as a physical barrier, I felt the need to act as a barrier, because when you look at two people who you love and respect, that you look up to, and you see one of them really beat the other one senseless, you would just question it, and you say, well, why aren't I doing something about it? Why? And so your instinct, your gut instinct, just tells you to get in there and try and fix it. And so that's what I did. You do it once, you do it again, and so it essentially became routine.
Did your father have any redeeming features?
How so?
Was there anything good about him?
Yeah. My dad was a smart man. He was a lawyer by trade. He was well educated, very well respected in the community. I remember people in our in the Middle Eastern community would come to me and tap me on the shoulder and say, "Your dad's a gentleman. Your dad's a genius. He's a good man."
What would you say to that?
Well, I would nod and say yes, he is.
So you had the community fooled.
Yeah. He had the community fooled, and we didn't speak out about it until the day we fled our family home. So up to that day, my dad was the pillar of the community. He established a language school that still runs today, even though he's in jail. The language school still runs today. He's done so much good work in the community. And even us, we used to have family picnics. We used to have family gatherings, religious and cultural gatherings. We used to, show up to these gatherings as a united family. But things got to a stage where my dad threatened to kill us in our own family home. He, after a big argument, when he couldn't arm himself with anything, whether if it's a knife, whether if it's a jug or anything else. When he couldn't arm himself with anything, he turned around and said, "You can't watch me 24/7. When you least expect it, I'm going to lock you all in this house and I'm going to burn the house down." So after that incident, we decided to pack up our bags and leave. There were 4 of us. We had 4 bags. We chucked it all in the car and we fled the family home.
And what had happened to your mother by that stage? How had she been broken down?
She was... she was essentially, she was scared for her life. She was scared for her children, and she just didn't know what was going to come her way and I guess our way if we were to stay in the family home. She didn't want to come home one day to find all of us kids locked in the house with the house burnt down. I didn't want to do the same thing. I don't want to go to, I was 21 years old at the time. I didn't want to go to uni one day and then come home at night to find the house half burnt down with my family inside. So none of us wanted to take that risk, and that's why we decided to, while we still have one another, while we're still safe, let's pack up our bags and leave. That was the only option.
And his figure in your life, what did that do to you psychologically? Walking on eggshells all the time. You must have had it in your mind all the time.
I did, and I guess I guess it becomes things become second nature. So you're always listening for something. You're always listening for either dad's voice to be escalated or mum's voice to go a little bit louder, or if there was any yelling and screaming, you would automatically get up and go and check it out. Sometimes false alarm. They might be mucking around, or someone might be, I don't know, they might have dropped a plate and it might have been broken, or it might have been something that was it just wasn't what you were thinking. But because you're you set yourself up so that automatically, as soon as there's a scream or as soon as there's a loud noise or anything like that, you get up and run to it just to make sure that everything's okay. You put yourself in that habit, and you develop those gut instincts.
So getting away from an abuser, typically a very hard thing to do, that lots of women and children struggle with.
Yep.
How did you actually manage to pull away from him?
I guess like a Band-Aid. So it was, once we fled the family home, we never returned. Given the communication that took place between my sisters, my mum and I, and my dad, we knew that there was no point returning, because he continued to threaten us. When we fled the family home, he said that it's too late for you now that you've all left. There will be consequences for your actions.
Because he was embarrassed by that. Because I suppose the community would have been aware then.
Yep. Yeah. So the community was aware of it, and it wasn't just about the divorce, because Couples split all the time. People get divorces. It's, that's not the issue. But the issue was the abuse and the violence. And I guess, how can you have a pillar of the community who's a gentleman, who's such a good man, but behind closed doors he's an abusive father?
And do you think making such a contribution to the community so publicly and being seen in that way, that enables him to continue abuse more so perhaps behind closed doors, because you have that great image and no one's going to look for the signs or believe that you would behave that way if you're this good, publicly?
Well, I guess you can wear that mask and you can wear it really well, and I think that's what he did. Is that he was heavily involved in the community. He was he was a smart man. He was charming. He was funny. He was great at what he did. And so when you are that much of a gentleman, no one questions you. And so he got away with it. And so I don't think he ever saw the day that he would have to face these consequences. And I guess he said that every action has a reaction and has a consequence. So the actions that he showed and what we saw for over 2 decades, well, there were the consequences. Things were slowly coming to surface, and everyone started to find out the truth.
Where did his anger come from?
I pointed down to 2 things, and I guess this is purely my observation and what I've seen. My dad grew up in a similar environment that I grew up in. He grew up in an abusive environment himself. My grandfather was an abusive man, and my grandma and I guess my dad's siblings, they all copped it. So that's I guess one reason. But the other reason is my dad had a very strong belief in terms of gender roles and where women sat in the hierarchy, so to speak. And if I was to tell you about our family home, my dad was at the very top of the chart, and everyone else sat underneath him. So it was like an org chart. My dad was the CEO, and everyone else had to report to him. And so even with myself, I probably had more authority than my older sister and my mum. And so that was his belief. That's the way he saw things. And the reason I say that is because when I was 13 years old, the first and only time that I had a father and son chat with my dad was about this. It was about gender roles and what's okay for men to do and what's okay for women to do. And I clearly remember in that conversation, he said, my dad said to me, he said, "Son, in our family home, the women in our family home are our integrity. If they misbehave, if they do something that brings shame to the family, then it's up to us to discipline them." And when you hear that as a 13-year-old kid, you start to absorb it. And like I said, I looked up to my dad, and he was the smartest man that I knew. Every problem that I had, I would go to him. I relied on him for guidance. And when he came out with that sort of advice, well, what do? It's as a young kid, it's a superhero that you look up to. And so
I think that's how things should be then.
That's right. So you don't
question it. Did he tell you to look after your sisters and your mother?
He did, but in a way that controlling them was looking after them.
Like keep them in line.
Yes. Right. Yes.
Did you think he was capable of carrying out those death threats?
At the time, no. No, I thought, he's my dad. He's probably mad. He's making death threats. And I guess, now that I think about it, the closer we got to the time that we left the family home, those death threats would become, they would become more regular and they would become more severe. To be so descriptive, to tell someone that you're going to lock them in their family home and burn the house down. He didn't just turn around and say, "I'm going to kill you," and leave it at that. But he was very descriptive. And so, when things got to that point, I had heard him say that he's going to kill us before. But, when as I said, when the threats, got so descriptive that he was describing to us what he was going to do, that's when we actually sat down as a family. That's my sisters and my mum. When we sat down as a family and thought, well, what are our options? Because essentially what we had to do was, it was a couple of days after that threat that we decided to leave the family home. But before that, we sort of had this plan that there needs to be 2 people together at all times. if my mum was not to be left alone at home, I was not to be left alone at home, and neither were my sisters. So it needs to be a minimum of 2 people at all times to make sure that we're all okay.
Constantly looking over your shoulder at that time. And did you involve police and do things like restraining orders and that?
So once we fled the family home, yes. Once we drew the line and said that enough is enough, that's when we went to the police station and we reported everything. Reported everything that we had seen, over 2 decades. Anything and everything from the emotional and the financial abuse right through to the threat that we'd received and what caused us to flee our family home. And we told the police, we said, well, we've packed our bags. We're not going back.
What could they do for you?
Well, we applied for a restraining order. The restraining order was served a few weeks after we'd applied for it. You rely on lawyers and legal services to sort of guide you, through family court, through getting the restraining order, the 2 different processes, 2 different court systems, and I guess that's what we started. We started off the legal battle per se, and unfortunately, my mum didn't last to finish off any of those legal battles because 12 months after we fled the family home, my dad tracked my mum down at the convention centre, and this was on the 21st of March 2010, and he stabbed her to death in front of 300 witnesses. And so up to that point, I thought life was hard and things were difficult, and we were constantly watching over our shoulders, and we had faced poverty, we had faced homelessness, we had been isolated, there was no support around us. And I thought, things are hard. And then when my mum passed away and when my older sister and I had to sort of pick up the pieces, then you sort of think, gee, I thought life was hard before this. We don't know where to start. Your entire world just gets turned upside down.
How did you hear that she'd been killed?
So it was late at night. It was probably about 11 o'clock at night. And I remember I'd just gone to sleep and my phone rang, my mobile phone rang, and I picked up the phone. It was my sister's friend who was on the phone, and she said, come down to the convention center because your dad just stabbed your mum. And so there and then I thought, this is a dream. I know I've gone to sleep. I remember, I've gone to sleep. It's a nightmare.
You must have had nightmares similar to that before.
You do, but it's the nightmares are vague, and the nightmares are the nightmares didn't have my dad with a knife. The nightmares didn't have bad news like that. The nightmares were more shadowy or dark figures that would haunt you or chase you. That nightmare that I thought I was having was very detailed, and it was too real. So I think it was a bit of a blur from there. The only thing I remember is I got to the convention center. I drove down there with my younger sister in the car, and I was in my tracksuit, so I ran inside. The convention center had been locked down, and I had to talk to the security and tell him who I was and why I was there. So he let me in, and when I went in, I remember I was trying to go into this room where people were, tens and hundreds of people were trying to pour out of this room. So you imagine you're trying to squeeze yourself through people to try and get to this room. And, once I sort of got into the room,
What feeling did you have inside of you when you were going towards that?
You don't think, I don't know what sort of a feeling I had. I wasn't thinking. I just wanted to get inside that room. I don't know what I was searching for. I don't know what I was expecting. You don't know what to expect. You don't know what you're going to come across. All I wanted to do was to go and see what was happening. I guess, because I wasn't there when the incident took place. So,
and maybe see that it wasn't real. Maybe
wanted, maybe a part of me wanted to confirm, is it my mum? Is it real? How bad is it? I don't know anything. Those were the only words that were given to me via the phone. So I just wanted to see it for myself. And when I saw my mum, she was literally lying down in a pool of her own blood. And so that was the sight that I saw. And so I don't know. I froze on the spot, and and I remember I was trying to look for my older sister. I wondered where she was, and she wasn't. She was on the side of a room, and so I immediately went to her, and then the police came to get us, and they got us out of that room, and then I remember I had this feeling came over me that I needed to go and see my dad. So then I started questioning the police, and I said, "Where's my dad? I need to go and see him." And they said, "Well, no, you can't speak to your dad." And I remember I got very agitated with the cops on the night. And I remember I was holding onto the guy's jacket, and I said, "I need to see my dad." And so he then held on to me, and not that he pressed me against the wall, but he kind of held me firmly, and he said, "Listen, you can't see your dad," and he said, "You need to cooperate with us, otherwise we'll need to take you away."
What did you think you needed to say to him or hear from him? If you'd got to him in that moment, what would?
Why did you do it? What the hell is the matter with you? I was angry.
Did you want to attack him?
I'm sure if I saw him, I probably would have. Yeah. And you know what? That's probably the reason why I haven't gone to see him or why I haven't visited him. It's because I'm still angry. I'm still angry about what's happened, and I often say this when I talk about I share my story from time to time, and one of the questions that I do get is that what would you do, or what would you have done, and why didn't you take revenge? And I say that for me, revenge is a normal feeling. It's not it's not twisted to want revenge on someone. Now you imagine if I come to you and if I punch you on the shoulder, what would be your first reaction? Sure, you'll try and block it, but what would be would you not want to punch me back or push me back or or swear at me? That would be I would say that would be a normal reaction. If someone hurts you, you would want to hurt them back in some way,
and you want to know why. That's right.
You want to know why, and so that was probably the thing that I felt is that I wanted revenge. I wanted to hurt him. And I don't think it was a sick and twisted feeling. No, but it's just
anyone would have to feel that way. It's so natural to feel that.
It would be natural, but it's how you go about taking revenge that that defines you. That
and what does it serve as well? Sadly, tremendously sadly. But what do you get from it?
So what was I going to do? Bring myself down to his level and go and hurt him or go and hurt his family? No, that wasn't what I ended up doing, and that wasn't what I was going to do long term. And so, but there and then on the night, I wanted to see him. I wanted to get an answer. I wanted to see why he did it, and sure, maybe in the process, if I had seen him, maybe I would have attacked him.
So you've never asked? You never got an answer?
I never got an answer.
He wrote you a letter.
He wrote me multiple letters. Yes. I never asked, and he never responded to, I guess, to a question, but he went on to justify his actions. And in those letters, quite lengthy, we're talking, 12, 15 pages of reasons and justification. He, talked about how he felt ashamed and how he did what he had to do in order to survive. That was his reasoning.
Yeah. And when you read that,
it just makes you angry. I think it made me furious, because I thought, how can you think like that? How can you think like that about a person that you share the life with?
No remorse.
No. We didn't see any remorse in the trial. We didn't see. We had the family court trial where he had the opportunity to cross-examine us. And we went through the murder trial, where when you're giving evidence in the Supreme Court, the defendant sits a couple of meters away from you. So my dad would have been sitting, maybe a meter more from where we're sitting at the moment, and to sit there and to go into detail about how this person was abusive to you and your sisters and your mum, and the sort of person that he was, just to sit there and share that with the jury, and for that person to just stare at you for hours while you're giving evidence. It's there was no remorse in that.
So he was just stone-faced throughout the trial.
Yep. And I guess, he pleaded not guilty. So he wanted to, that's what he was sticking to. And that's why he didn't show any remorse, because he was saying, well, if I'm not guilty, I have nothing to be remorseful of. I don't need to say sorry because I'm not guilty.
Were you shocked that that was how he responded after it happened?
No, not really. No, I kind of expected that. Knowing my dad, I expected it, unfortunately.
And what was it, like an egoic thing, or just his beliefs were so firm and so twisted in many ways that he genuinely convinced himself of that?
I think he genuinely convinced himself. He was adamant that he was a victim. He was a victim because he, again, in those letters, he says that he suffered mental abuse, that he suffered at the hands of my mum, but
just totally delusional.
And I guess we were all witnesses. My sisters and I, we lived in a house, so we saw what sort of abuse took place. We knew who the perpetrator was and who the victim was. So I think he just had to genuinely believe it, so that he could sell it to his legal team, and he could put on a charade like that.
Did your mum ever share why she married him?
Yeah, there were stories that that we heard about their early life, and that was my dad was a funny man. My dad was a charming person. My dad was he was smart, he was intelligent, and my mum used to say that he used to joke around all the time. In their when they were sort of dating and getting to know one another, my dad was a joker. There was not a moment when they weren't joking about things and laughing. And I could see that. I could see that when we used to go out to picnics, and my dad would share a joke, or he would make fun of something, and I could see that he was a funny man.
Was it sort of a surprise when he did that, though? Do you think he had some sort of condition?
I don't think he had a condition, but I think that he grew up in an environment where what he saw he adopted as a normal way of life, and I guess he mimicked that, and he never once questioned that what he was doing was he never questioned whether if it was right or wrong, and I get that, because I was. Well, when I was 13, I was giving this lecture about where women belong in the family home and in society, vaguely defined the hierarchy for me, and so I started to put that in play when I was about 18 years old. I got into my first serious relationship. The relationship that I brought her home. I introduced her to my sisters, to my mum, never to my dad. Because my dad had defined this rule that, if you were to get into a relationship, make sure you keep it outside of the family home. Never bring your partner inside, and that's the end of it. So I never questioned it. I never challenged it, because I knew what my dad was like. And so when I was 18, I started dating this girl, and she was a lovely girl, and we broke up about 15 months or so after. After we started dating, we broke up, and she, she essentially told me that, that I was an asshole, and I had, she gotten to know the other side of me that she never knew existed. And so it was certain words and certain things that she had said that made me think about myself.
Think I'm becoming my dad. Did you think that?
That's exactly what I thought. There were the words. I think I'm very slowly becoming my father.
And when you recognized that, how did that make you feel?
Made me feel like shit. I thought, man, I don't want to end up like him. I saw how much abuse we copped. I saw the way he treated my mum. I thought, I don't want to end up like that. And so there, it was really at that point. And I guess when you have your first relationship, you have your first heartbreak. Everyone deals with things differently, but for me, I really took it to heart, and I thought, what did I do to get dumped like this, and to be, told that I'm an asshole, and that I'm a completely different person.
But then you could see, well, actually, this and this and this and this.
And until I started to reflect. I started to look at myself and look at who I am. I thought, oh wow, yes, well, my dad does this. Yes, my dad used to do this. Oh yeah, I remember my dad doing this. So you start looking at all these things. I was manipulative. I was emotionally abusive. I was controlling. Every time and I remember every time that particular girl, when she wanted to go out, she would text me or call me and say, oh, I'm going out with my friends. And so and it was because I sort of molded her that way. I wanted her to check things with me, and
so you're like, where are you going? Who are you with?
All of those questions. Yep, all of them, and that's where it all starts. And where it all starts.
When you had that breakup, did you talk to your dad about it?
I didn't. No, I didn't talk to my dad about any relationship advice, purely because he. And I did think about it, because I thought, well, I kind of need to speak to an adult. I needed a different father figure. So I started seeking that. I had some older mates that I went to. I had some other father figures, work colleagues. I really started to search for a new father figure, not necessarily to discuss things with, but I needed to make sure that I pull away from my dad, who I've been following.
You need to model yourself on the right thing,
on something else. Yeah, and that's when my mum came into effect. And that's when I started talking to her about some of my relationships, and some of the things that I'd come across, and I just didn't know the answers, or I hadn't come across it. So I wanted to check it with someone who may have had similar experiences to myself. And because my dad told me that you're not allowed to bring any girls home, and that the family home is for the family only. And so I thought, well, if I'm dating a girl, it's not like I'm marrying her there and then. So I didn't feel comfortable to bring her home and introduce her to my dad. And so, I couldn't go to him and I didn't feel comfortable to go to him, because, you imagine if I went to him and say, hey, Dad, I've been doing these sort of things with, I've been abusive, I've been manipulative with this girl.
That's why I asked, because what would he have said? He would have said, well, it's her problem.
That's right. Yep. Who knows what sort of advice I would have been given.
She's not the right one or something.
That's right.
That'd be your response.
I can only imagine. Yeah, that would be the sort of response that I would have gotten.
Did your mum talk to you about your father's abuse as well while it was happening? Did she say, like, help me? Did she admit to how bad it was? What was her sort of response to it?
I guess, the reason why I know what my dad was like in the early stages of my parents' relationship was because my older sister and I, would question her from time to time and say, well, Dad wasn't always like this, surely. Otherwise, you wouldn't end up with such a person. What was he like in the early days? There was some stuff that we had, that we hadn't witnessed that she shared with us. She would say that your father had, I don't know, had told me that this is the amount of money that I have. This is my spending money for the week or for the month. So there were those sort of things that we didn't know, because that happened in the bedroom or behind closed doors or somewhere where we just didn't see or hear it. Your father told me that we're no longer allowed to affiliate with this family or with this person. So there were the sort of things that we would hear about that we just didn't know. In terms of the physical abuse, and I guess even the verbal abuse, the yelling and screaming and the arguments, we witnessed most of it. And so,
did she say, we have to find a way to get out of this?
She didn't. It was actually it was us. It was, and I guess at that time when we had that conversation, we were all on the same page. Because when we sat down after we were threatened, when we sat down and said, all right, we need to make sure that if any of us are staying home, that there needs to be another person that needs to stay home as well. We need to have a minimum 2-person policy as such. That's what was happening in our family home. We started to sort of realize that it wasn't sustainable. You can do this 2-person thing, but how long can you keep it up for? You might be able to do it for a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months. Sooner or later, we all have our own lives. Maybe one day my sister might be at uni, I might be at work, and so my mum ends up being alone at home. So we sort of realized that it's not going to be sustainable, and the only option was to get out. And we didn't want to leave it to chance either. You don't want to take the risk. Well, was he serious about what he said earlier or not?
Did you think once you left, did you think that you would be all right, that you would?
Yeah, we thought once we leave the family home, we'll be fine. And that's, again, I thought up to that point, I thought my life was hard. I'm always.
It was. It was hard before.
It was, but
compared to the norm, like.
Sure, but once we took this step and we fled the family home, then we started to see other challenges. Like when we left the family home, we realized that my mum doesn't have any family here. My dad's got a big family, but all of my dad's family support him, and so we thought, well, we didn't have a place to go to, so we became homeless. My older sister and I, we were in our final year of university. We had part-time jobs that gave us a bit of extra cash, but my mum, she spoke very little English and she was unemployed. So,
which is a big means to controlling someone as well.
It is when you control the finances.
You'd be nothing without me.
Correct. Yep, you rely on me. You're dependent on me. So, and that's one of the reasons why many women end up going back to the perpetrators. It's because they're financially dependent. So we faced poverty. That was another thing. And the biggest challenge we faced was isolation. Because I remember the first night, we had to sleep in the car. I had my mobile phone down, and I remember looking at it thinking, you know what? I can't think of a single person that I can talk to right now. I can't think of a single I can't even pick up my phone and go through names and think of a single person that I can ask for help. Because when you've been betrayed by your own blood and flesh, I don't think you can depend or trust anyone else around you, regardless of how long you've known them. I've got a handful of good friends that I rely on, that I know that at a drop of a hat they'll be there for me, and they have been ever since we lost our mum. But there and then I could not bring myself to calling these people, because I thought, well, what are they going to do? Mom and dad just threatened us, and this is the situation we're in now because of him. So what are these people going to do?
Yeah, so your worldview and your concept of trust, of course, totally
Shattered.
Affected by that.
Yeah.
Has that changed since then?
Yes, it has.
Did it take a lot of work though?
It did, because I guess with my older sister and I, we became parents overnight. We were legal guardians of my younger sister. She was 12 years old at the time that my mum passed away, and my dad went to jail, so we essentially became the guardians, and we really, both of us, we really depended on ourselves to sort of pull through, put on a mask so that we don't seem upset, or we don't look sad in front of my younger sister, and we need to stay strong, and we can do that ourselves. We don't need anyone else, and so yeah, you do that, but I think it's a coping mechanism.
Yeah,
I can do this myself. Well,
you don't have a choice.
You don't, no. And the thing is, when my mum passed away, I was heartbroken. And I didn't want to experience the same thing again. So I thought, well, I've been betrayed by by my own family. So I don't want to rely on anyone else, and I don't want to trust anyone else. And so you do, you sort of go through these experiences, and it changes you, and you develop some coping mechanisms, and you sort of do this. So on some days I was great, and other days I wasn't. On some days I was trusting, and other days I wasn't. And so we've been through a bit of a journey. But now that I think about it, and now that I look back, it took a little bit of work to undo that, but it's all part of the journey.
How did it impact becoming the man that you wanted to be?
I learned that I can't do everything myself, and that I should but prior to all of this, prior to us leaving the family home, I relied heavily on a close network of people around me, whether if it's work colleagues, whether if it's university friends, or whoever it might be. I relied on them, and I had a very good, very close relationship with them. When we fled the family home, it's sort of, I felt detached, and I felt that I wasn't part of the previous world that I was a part of. And then when my mum passed away again, as I was sort of, rebuilding that trust, and I was, rebuilding this vase that had been shattered, then, the vase got picked up and it got shattered again. So, then I started rebuilding it. And so, I think I sort of got myself to a point where, I thought, no, what I was doing before all of this happened what was fine. I was on the right path, and I trusted my friends, and I had a good a good group of people around me. So I just had to get rid of these gut instincts that I had developed, that you can't trust people, and that you just need to rely on yourself. I needed to get rid of that, because I knew that that was just a bit of a mechanism that I had developed. And I went through probably 3 years of counselling after my mum passed away, because I needed to talk to someone about sure, there was the grief, but also the trust and my group of friends that were around us to sort of support us. I needed to know that I could trust again, and it took a little bit of work, but we got there. So it was a journey.
And out of that, you and your sisters started the Zahra Foundation
Yes.
in honor of your mother. Just tell us about that as well.
The reason why the foundation came about was my older sister. She had an idea, and she said, this is what I want to do. And so then I joined the conversation, and we started speaking to the domestic violence sector, and we spoke to a lady. Her name is Maria. So she was the chief executive officer of a small not-for-profit group that helped us, and so they were like family to us. And so we went to them and said, this is what we want to do. And so they jumped on board, and they really helped us drive this initiative. And things got to a point where we needed to find out, well, what are we going to do? We don't want to just set up a foundation for the sake of setting it up. Let's try and address a gap. And so when we talked to the domestic violence sector, they said that they help a lot of women through crisis. Women just like my mum who flee abusive homes. They become homeless, they face poverty, they become isolated. They go through these domestic violence services. They help them for about 3 or 6 months, maybe 12 months. Everyone's different. And then after that crisis point, there's nothing. There's a gap. So what do you do there? And so we decided to focus on that and actually delve into it, and we decided to really focus on financial literacy and economic empowerment. Because when we fled our family home, I was in my final year of uni. My older sister was in her final year of university. Have you been to university?
Yeah. I did journalism.
So as a uni student, you're always broke, right?
Oh yeah.
That's a normal thing.
Still broke now.
Still broke now. Well, it takes a few years to recover from that. So we were no different. We had part-time jobs. We had a little bit of cash, but money comes and goes. My younger sister was 11 years old at the time. She was in primary school. My mum spoke very little English, and she did not have a job. So money became a huge factor for us. I remember we were trying to budget. We were trying to figure out whether if we had enough money for to sort of get us through to the end of the week, and that depends on what we're spending money on. Are we getting takeaway food? We need to make sure we have enough money for petrol, and we need to make sure we have a bit of a rainy fund. So all of those things. But that's the thing, is that I put it this way: if my mum was there by herself, or if my mum was there with my younger sister, or even with a younger child, how would that sort of person be able to take that next step, or get help, or put themselves on a path where there is some sort of a future, and you can see the light at the end of a tunnel.
So empowering women to provide for themselves.
That's right. Yeah. And I guess these women have had all sorts of control taken away from them. So when you have women who don't really know how to operate an ATM, don't really know how to read a bank statement, don't really understand how they can manage their debt. They have no idea of saving or anything monetary related. Yeah, life skills. Then how do you expect them to make it through, but also I guess create some sort of a future for themselves and for their families? And so we decided to focus on this financial literacy, and I guess give back the control that's been taken away from these women.
And what has the foundation been able to do?
So we've been running a program called Pathways to Empowerment. It's an 8-week program, and it runs in school terms because we know that a lot of women that come through our programs, they do have school-aged children, and so when they drop off their kids at school, they can come to the program, they can do the course, and the hours are flexible so that they can leave in time to go and pick up their kids and then go back home. So we run it's a short 8-week program that teaches them anything and everything, whether if it's around savings, it's around debt management. A lot of women that come to us, they have debts. I'll give you an example. A lady that came to us with a $20,000 loan for a car, but the car wasn't in her name. The loan was, but the car wasn't. And so by the time you go through family court and work out, go through property settlement and work out exactly who owns what asset and who owes what to the other party, by the time you do that, that might be a few years down the track. Well, what's this person going to do with that $20,000 loan? No job and no way to meet those repayments.
Paying for lawyers as well.
Paying for lawyers and as I said, when you're trying to get a restraining order, that's one system you're trying to navigate. And when you're trying to get property settlements finalized through the family court, that's another court system. It's very confusing, overwhelming, and even with us, we found it. My older sister and I, we found it very difficult and confusing to navigate. So when you have women that come through that are overwhelmed by all this information, we try and break it down in chunks and try and take them through that journey. That things will be okay, and they can come to this program more than once. We've had women that have come through the first time around, but because of all the anxiety and everything that they've gone through, they haven't really been able to absorb all this information. They come through again, so they might do a term 1. They might give themselves a bit of a break, and they come through again in term 3 or term 4. And the second time around, and every single one of them has said this, the second time around, I was able to sit down, concentrate, and focus, and absorb the information rather than worry about my child or worry about what family court's going to say or worry about this restraining order or anything else. So that's one initiative, but the other initiative, it came to us a little bit later on down the track, was that a lot of the women were coming through this empowerment program, and they wanted to go and pursue further studies, or they wanted to go and get a job, but they had financial barriers. So we've had multiple participants that have come through, and they wanted to go and study something at TAFE. We had this lady who wanted to go and study to become a chef. But to become a chef, you need a few sets of uniforms. You need shoes, and you need textbooks and other bits and pieces, utensils, and all those things. And you have to pay for that stuff up front. So she came to us. She explained the story, and that's how it all sort of came about. Is that we're seeing a lot of women who want to pursue further study, but it's just a financial barrier. So we created a program, and we called it Opportunity Knocks. And we provide women with small grants that want to go and further educate themselves, or even in some instances, women have come to us and have said, "Hey, I've got a job interview lined up, but I actually don't have any clothes for to wear for the interview." Or even some of them have come through and said, "I actually do have a casual part-time job, and I need some I need some clothes for it." And so we provide them with either either a grant or gift cards, so that they can go and get themselves the appropriate clothing.
Fantastic. So 1 in 3 women experiences some kind of abuse from their partner or ex-partner.
Correct.
Why are so many men in this country abusive?
That's a good question. My observation is that to a degree we've normalized this. And I'll give you an example. I can probably give you a couple of examples. There's there was a joke that I heard a few years ago, and I don't remember the wording exactly, but when you ask someone, when they're going home after work, what are you going to do? And they say, I'm going home to kiss the dog and beat the wife. It's something along those lines. I've heard it a few times, and it's that sort of behavior that normalizes the abuse, even though it's a joke, and people always say this to me. They say, "Well, it's a joke; it's not serious." But when you okay and normalize a joke about beating your wife, or when you have a piece of clothing, bond singlet. What's the bond singlet called?
Wife beater.
It's a wife beater. Why do we call it a wife beater?
I don't know, but they should definitely change that.
When we have that sort of thing in our everyday language, well, to a degree we're saying it's okay. Well, I wear a wife beater singlet, and some people proudly come out and say that it's a wife beater singlet.
What are men getting out of abusing their partners, do you think?
Control, masculinity, and I think that's what it comes down to. Is that a lot of some men may have become unemployed. They're no longer the breadwinner. So in order to show that they're still the masculine man that they are, and they're still in charge of the house, they need to control or abuse their families.
That ironically, it's the weakest thing you can do.
It is, but from their perspective, it's not. From their perspective, they physically they overpower the women, so that makes them the head of the household.
So self-esteem, having such low self-esteem that it's a way of regaining it.
It is, and I guess one way that I always try and encourage people is that if I could give my younger self some advice, I would say if I could go and talk to my 18-year-old self before I broke up with that girl, not that there are any regrets or anything, but if I could give my younger self some advice, is that everything that you had been taught as a young kid, well, not everything was right. The role models that you had in your life, they weren't exactly the best role models, and some of the things that you were taught as a young kid, I was taught not to cry because it makes me less of a man. And I remember I was in primary school, and I remember this very clearly. I was probably in the second or third grade, and at that time we were in Iran, and I remember coming home because I had a fight with a couple of kids, and they beat me up. So I went home and I was crying, and my dad asked me, he said, "Why are you crying?" And I said, "I got into a fight with so-and-so." And so he pulled me aside, pulled out his belt, and he decided to whack me a few times. And he goes, "You're a man. Men don't cry. If someone beats you up, then you go back there and you beat them back up. It's the last time I'll see you do this." Now remember, when you're 6 or 7 years old and you
go, "Oh, okay, right."
You accept it.
I don't want to get hit with a belt.
No, that's right. I've just been hit, and I've come home, and this is the way that it's been addressed. So as a kid, you just don't question it. You take it on board, you absorb it, and it those things come through and resurface when you're becoming a teenager, or when you're in your 20s and 30s. And if you don't tackle it, and if you don't talk to someone about it, and if you don't address it, you're there's less of a chance that you can address it later on down the track.
And on that, there's thousands and thousands of children witnessing domestic violence on a daily basis, and also experiencing it themselves in terms of being abused themselves. What does that do to generations of young people?
Correct. Well, you just shared the statistics with us. 1 in 3. So you imagine if 1 in 3, and in every single situation, if there is a child involved, then what does that tell you about the next generation? That's why you've got so many people that are the younger generation. You've got so many of them that are coming out with with anxiety and so many other mental health issues. It's because of what they've witnessed, what they're exposed to at home, and how they're going about dealing with it. Because chances are they're probably taught to grow up, to man up, and to men don't cry, don't show tears, and sign of weakness, and all those struggles, you're sort of told to park it aside and deal with it and man up.
What can we as men do to prevent abuse?
Oh, I would say the first thing we need to do is change our culture. If someone needs to talk, or if someone is showing signs of stress, then encourage them to open up, encourage them to seek assistance. Because the first thing we do is, do you need a shoulder to cry on? Do you need to go and see a shrink? That's the sort of that would have definitely been something that that I grew up with. I think about high school and the amount of times that, boys would turn to one another and say, oh, the shoulders are crying. Do you need some tissues, love? Those sort of sayings. And that's, going back to, the jokes. That's
which goes back to saying men are this way, women are this way. And if you're outside of that, then you're wrong.
That's right. Then you don't fit, which means you need to change yourself in order to fit into this society and into this social structure, and this is the norm. Whereas that's what we're trying to change, and that's what we're trying to break.
Fantastic. Thanks for your time.
Thank
Arman.
you. Thanks for having me.
It's such a tragic story that stands out, and obviously it was one that was very publicized here, but also not an uncommon one. And we also know that one woman a week is killed by their former or current partner here in Australia as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to talk to someone who can explain the reality of what actually going through that is like, and put a face to it and talk about the pain that comes with it and just how many people it affects, it makes it sink in a lot more, because that's the other thing with statistics is they kind of just water off a duck's back, and we hear so many bad numbers and things all the time, but what does it take to actually make people want to change their behaviours?
Correct.
And do you think if we can find a way to get more men to deal with their own shit, that we'll see that less violence towards their women?
I would say so, definitely. And that's why I think that it's important for us men to when we talk about domestic violence, I think that domestic violence is largely a man's issue. Because if we men are majority of the perpetrators, that's what we are, and if we can change that, then I think the statistics will definitely improve, and hopefully the flow-on effects, like the stress to the kids and everything else that sort of creates, all the ripple effects, we'll be able to see less and less of that, and hopefully down the track we can not have these sort of conversations.
And loving and respecting ourselves and our friends will allow us to do the same for the women in our lives.
And I think that's one of the things that we need to do, is that we need to as men. I know that we've always been told to sort of man up and be rough, but we do need to be more gentle with ourselves, but also with with each other, with our mates, and the jokes that we have, whether if it's about women or whether if it's about the so-called sensitive men, that needs to stop, because we need to change that culture. And the sooner we change that culture, the sooner we can work on these statistics, improving them, but also our own well-being.
Thank you. I'm sure you're going to be a great dad.
Thank you.
If you got something out of this episode, please leave a comment and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps us grow the show so we can keep bringing you the content that matters. If you want to stay up to date with what we're doing and get involved, get onto the Young Blood Podcast Community Facebook group and follow Young Blood Podcast on Instagram. And if you're keen to get in touch with me, email youngbloodpodcast, all one word, @hotmail.com. This podcast was produced by the talented Rory Noak at Podbooth. You can check them out at podbooth.com.au. This is Young Blood. Thanks for joining us. Catch you next time.